There's a disclaimer on this. This video, we shot that video as a promotion for a protest we were doing. And obviously the whole rendering thing is, it's something that animal advocates love to go on about. At that time, we were actually seeing the blue trucks going in the back. We knew that they were actually taking the dead animals through past the live animals. So this was, I mean, we pursued that track at that time, and we found out that it didn't hold up at all. That there was no money being transferred, and they weren't setting a quota. But it was still a powerful video at the time for us to engage people in what we were trying to get, the point that we were trying to get across. So let me just. So who am I, and why am I standing up here? So I'm the opposite side. I am the advocate, and I am actually a human physician. I practice pathology in Orange County. I specialize in diagnosing leukemias and lymphomas. So nothing to do with animals, but I have a strong background in advocacy. I actually started working in the field of HIV/AIDS and was very involved in that movement. And if you want to talk about a social movement that's been very, very successful in engaging the community, and where the community has come together to effectuate extraordinary change, it is the AIDS epidemic. And I started out in 1989 working with people with AIDS, and also, I mean, obviously I worked with people who were dying. I was doing policy document writing, and also working in basic science research. I did that for 8 years, or 10 years actually. And then that's what drove me into medicine. So in 2000, when I started medical school, right as I started, I found out that we had 2 dog labs that we were going to have to do, which would end in the killing of the dog. They were live dog labs, and then the animal would have to be put down. So I launched a campaign very early on to get rid of that, and I almost got kicked out of medical school for that. So that's just a little bit of background. I also obviously foster and rescue a bunch of animals myself. So how did this whole thing start? So back in 2014, I was a bit of a social media neophyte, and I joined Facebook and had never been on Facebook. And pretty quickly, you know, if you're an animal person, aside from the cutesy dog videos and cat videos and kittens and all that, you know, a bunch of urgent dogs started coming across my newsfeed. And in particular, some ones from Orange County were coming across. And so I quickly found out that a way to help was to start pledging for them. So I started pledging, and you know, you put your pledge down. And after a few times, some of the animals weren't making it, and I remember making a comment on social media saying, oh, well, and it was sort of obviously very naive, and I said, well, I guess if the shelter's full, and I got a response back from the networker who, for this particular dog, who had said, actually the shelter's not full at all. And I thought, what? How is that possible? I mean, this is a dog that probably, you know, seemed like it should have been saved. So I carried on doing that for a little while, pretty short while, and I decided that it kept on happening, and so I decided that complaining on Facebook was really not an effective strategy. So I contacted the person who was posting all this, and basically decided to meet up with her, and met with her at the shelter, and she took me on a tour of the facility. And then that evening, I had organized a meeting with a few of the other volunteers. There were 2 other people that drove up with me. I live in San Diego, but I work in Orange County. And so we met up with her, and I basically told them that I was going to be going aggressively after the shelter, the same way that I had done with the dog lab. I knew that the effective strategy was to basically show them up for what they were doing. And ironically, out of that meeting, the original meeting, pretty much everybody who was involved in that original meeting ended up trying to counter our endeavors throughout the years. So we're talking about, this was back in 2015. So just a little bit about Orange County. Why Orange County? So Orange County has a population of 3.17 million. And if you look at the median household property value, it's 654,000, which is pretty high. And then looking down here, I guess I'm going to have to use, sorry, I'm going to have to use the laser pointer here. So if you look down here, you can see that the median household income is almost $20,000. It's actually more than $20,000 than everybody else in the United States. And 5 Orange County cities are ranked among the most, the nation's wealthiest. So the background is, you know, it's a very well, it does have, definitely has areas that are not so well off, but it's got a pretty wealthy community. And this is what their shelter was looking like. So as you saw in the video, all these empty kennels. I mean, it looks horrific. It looks like an old dog pound or animal pound. And nobody from the community was involved. I mean, they had very poor community engagement. Who wants to go to a shelter that looks like this? And you know, you can, I'm sure you can't see, but these are different kennel, these are all different kennel numbers. So we, throughout our campaign, we would have somebody go to the shelter every week and document how many empty kennels they had. And at any given time, it was always around 200 empty kennels. So with that, and they had a budget of $25 million a year. So they were killing animals, and they were also known as a kitten killing factory. And here are the numbers, just to draw your attention down here. So in 2015, the annual intake was almost 21,000. The live release rate overall was 67%, with 71% of kittens being killed. And that was over 4,000 kittens that were being killed on an annual basis. Just to draw your attention over here as well, because I'm going to come to this lawsuit a little bit, but there were almost 1,500 owner-requested euthanasias each year. I put up the data from 2011 just to show that back in 2011, which is only 4 years before that, their live release rate was, so this is not even, this is, obviously the owner-requesteds are taken out and they have a significant number of them, so really it was around 42% was their live release rate at that time. And yes, they did have their annual intake was much higher then, but still, this is just to show, kind of set the stage a little bit. So, one of the first steps here, so the background is that there were 5 grand jury reports that were very scathing. They already had that in place. And these were citing poor management as a significant problem. There was also a performance audit that similarly said the same thing. And part of the audit, they had an independent consultant called JVR Strategies, who was run by a veterinarian. And in the performance audit, and previously in 2007, she'd already done an investigation. And she had specifically made the recommendation that they stop cleaning the kennels, hosing down the kennels with the animals still inside. And they were continuing to do this. So this is 2015, it was recommended in 2007, and then again in 2015. And this dog here, Dante, was killed because he basically stuck the hose through the kennel bars, and he did what certainly my dogs would do, which is he went for the hose, and they considered that to be aggression, and so he was killed. This dog here, Savannah, she was 11 months old, and she was killed for being quote-unquote bratty. So one of the first things I did was I contacted Josie Robertson from JVR Strategies, and I explained this whole situation and said that they were continuing to do this. I got a response from her. It really, basically, she sent it back to the shelter director, and nothing was really done at that time. So the next move was essentially to go and protest. So, sorry, back up a second, because I forgot to mention that one of the things that I also did was set up this group, No Kill Shelter Alliance, which is the group from which we operate. The Facebook page is just the public profile, but a lot of the work was done behind the scenes. So, so through this organization that I'd set up with a couple of other people, we've staged this very small protest, which was outside the Board of Supervisors during one of their meetings, and then after the the protest, we went inside and gave speeches and told them that basically we were not happy. And I've actually got my speeches at the end in the links. I'll just say that my presentation's a little longer, and if it goes over, I've prepared this so that you can continue to look. I've got links at the end, and so it's kind of a roadmap for what we did and how. And I can't tell you what one singular thing made us effective or not effective, but just to give you the background of how we effectuated change. So one of the other things that was a key component of this was there was already a lawsuit in place that involved this plaintiff called Sharon Logan, and she had witnessed a dog being surrendered in the parking lot by this woman who had claimed that the dog was aggressive. It was a young boxer mix, and there were 3 animal control officers who came outside the shelter and brought in the euthanasia cart, which was otherwise obviously known as the Wheel of Death, and they were trying to shove the dog inside. The dog was not trying to resist at all, and then as she was walking away, the dog was carted off and killed within half an hour. And as she was walking away, she was laughing and saying that it was because it was her stupid boyfriend's dog. So Sharon caught this on video. The video went viral, and as a result of that, there was a lawyer in San Diego who saw the video and decided that this was a good strategy to go after the shelter, and specifically to prove that they were violating the Hayden Law, which in California there's a law from 1997, which was brought forward by Senator Thomas Hayden, that basically says that, sorry, I haven't got my bifocals on, it is the policy of the state that no treatable animal should be euthanized, and that a treatable animal shall include any animal that is not adoptable, but that could become adoptable with reasonable efforts. So at the time that I came onto the legal team, there was already a settlement agreement in place, and as part of the settlement agreement, we were to get the monthly euthanasia lists with all the animal IDs, the intake time, the intake date, and then the outcome and when the outcome occurred. And so we were able to look specifically at a category of owner-requested euthanasias because we knew that that's where they were violating the law. Also, we would get 5 records. We were allowed to get the records of 5 animals each month of our choosing to look over and to be able to prove that they were violating the law. We also got to make changes to the policy and procedure document that was pertaining to the owner-requested euthanasia category. So as part of the lawsuit, we hired a statistician. She happened to be a vet as well. And then what we also did was we put in about 300 to 400 public records requests through the Brown Act. And we got the specific records for all the animals that were under the owner-requested euthanasia category. And we scoured through them, and it was kind of like a cheat sheet, because we knew that through legal channels we were going to be getting 5 animals per month. And so we would request all of them, and then we could see where they were clearly violating, and then we were able to ask for those ones to bring in front of the judge, the ones that we felt where they truly were violating. We also put in public records requests for all the policy and procedure documents under which the shelter was operating. And one of the things that we found through this was that Orange County was, at the time, they were counting a litter of kittens and the mother as a single animal. And they were also using dead dogs in the denominator for their calculations of the youth rate, which obviously is going to skew the data significantly. So this is also, so these are the lists that we were getting right here, which I'm sure if you know how to query Chameleon, you know that's what you're going to get. And then we would send that to the statistician. The statistician would basically generate a bunch of different ways to look at the data. And as a result of her data analysis, we found out that the median time to death for both cats and dogs that were killed was 43 minutes. So if you think about that, that's 43 minutes for them to go through any documentation, for somebody to come, and if it's a medical dog, for them to come and do some kind of evaluation and determine that that dog is truly sick, or cat. Most of the owner requesteds were actually dogs, as it turns out. And 61% of dogs killed, so it's not 61% of dogs, but just 61% of the ones that were killed on the day of entry. And of the owner requested, 64% of those were killed within less than an hour of intake. Also, the other thing that completely blows my mind is that 70% of cats were killed within a day of intake, which is obviously a violation of the law right there. And that 60% of stray cats were being killed for being too young. So then we managed to secure a meeting with the chief of the Board of Supervisors, and it actually turns out it wasn't the chief of the Board of Supervisors, it was her chief of staff and her office manager. But that turned out to be a good thing because her chief of staff was somebody who was very powerful. He was previously the chief of police for Santa Ana, and was actually somebody who was very interested in what we were doing. So one of the key things for me that I think was very important was identifying somebody within the political structure who was really wanting to help. And it doesn't have to be the person who is the politician. Obviously, in this case, it was the chief of staff. So simultaneously, just going through this, I specifically started rescuing a bunch of dogs from OCAC, a bunch of behavior dogs, and showing that they actually were not behavior dogs at all, that they ended up being family dogs, and that they did perfectly fine in a home. I also collaborated with another large breed dog rescue, I financially collaborated, and we, again, we were taking a bunch of large breed dogs that were placed on the youth list for behavior reasons, and showing that they actually were family dogs. And obviously I shamelessly used my children to demonstrate this. Sometimes, maybe not so appropriately, by sticking them in cages. I do that a lot. So this is the guy that I'm talking about right here. This man here this is the chief of staff for the chair of the Board of Supervisors. And I would communicate with him on almost a daily basis. I would send him information from the no-kill movement. I would send him information about programs within, things about, how to run shelters, the programs that were necessary, and I would have an open line of communication with him. So much so, in fact, that I would text him on a Saturday night at 10 o'clock and say, look, this dog is on the youth list and shouldn't be. So for instance, this dog right here, in the middle, this is a 10-month-old puppy. I called him at 10 o'clock on a Saturday, and sure enough, he called the chief of the Board of, the chair of the Board of Supervisors, and she secured a rescue for this dog. And this dog here on the right as well. Now this dog here requires special mention because his name is Bowie, and he was found in a park tied to a tree. Animal control came out with a catch pole, brought him to the shelter, shoved him in the back where it was not visible to the public, shoved him in the kennel, and basically said that he could not be taken out of the kennel. So I actually secured a rescue to go and take him. And when they they wanted to interact with the dog, obviously, to know what they were dealing with, and they were denied any kind of interaction, saying that he was aggressive. And so I called my friend immediately, and the next day, he personally went to the shelter with his family and went and, met the dog, still in the kennel. And then he called me up and he said, come to the shelter tomorrow, bring the rescue, and we will get the dog out. And when we got there, yet again, they didn't want to let the rescue interact with the dog. So he basically leaned on them and said, you gotta do it. And so they got the dog out, got it into a play yard out back. The dog, bounced around with a ball, did fine. We ended up putting the dog in my car. I drove him to San Diego, and now he's adopted and does well, has never had a problem. So the reason I'm talking about this is that I actually got the politician, the chair of the Board of Supervisors, personally involved in rescuing dogs so she could understand what it was about. So then, shortly after that, we secured a second meeting, this time with the chair of the Board of Supervisors, and the shelter director, and also the CEO of Orange County, Frank Kim, and various other people. And during this meeting, we had 3 requests. I turned to the shelter director at this time and asked her, and she denied. She was just not gonna budge. So I asked for a moratorium on empty cage killing. With 200 empty kennels, they should not be killing animals like this. I asked for an oversight committee, and we also asked for an independent contractor to conduct a separate audit, a full audit of the shelter. And we got one of those wishes came true. So they did hire the independent contractor, and they actually hired the same one that had been previously at Orange County. But this time it was a much more comprehensive audit that was going to be conducted. And the initial contract was for $150,000, but they expanded the scope of that contract, so it was $350,000. And that included strategic planning and then an accountability phase, where and they're actually still there. And I obviously, at the same time, I basically forged a relationship with her. She's a vet, I'm a doctor. You know, even though the shelter director was a vet, we did not connect. But I connected with the head of JVR and was communicating with her a lot. I will also add that very early on, I started coming to these conferences, networking with a lot of the people here. I can see some people in the audience that I know. I think that was also a very important part of this, is networking. So despite these meetings and engagement with the Board of Supervisors and the independent contractor, there was still a bunch of infractions going on. I mean, this boxer on the side, Beha, she was seen in her kennel with foam coming out of her mouth. The visitor notified the shelter staff. They did nothing, and then she was found dead in her kennel the next day. Again, this puppy, Pudge, he was 8 months old, killed despite the rescue being in place. We were consistently documenting this sort of thing going on, with lots of water inside the kennels, blood strewn all over the kennel in this dog Marley's kennel. So we went for another protest, and this time it was a bigger protest. Obviously I went back to the Board of Supervisors and made some more speeches, but we decided that a protest was in order. And this time it was bigger. It was only, I think it was maybe 120 people, which is not huge, but for Orange County, with a community that was very disengaged and disconnected, that turned out to be quite a lot. And we actually had no media support whatsoever. They did not show up, they refused. They told us, until you get 200 people, we're not coming. So the other thing that happened was we got a little bit lucky. We had 2 very high-profile incidents involving so-called wolf dogs. I don't need to really go into detail, but it's essentially one of them, this dog Karma, was involved. The owners were involved in some domestic violence incident, and animal control came over, and one of the children mentioned that they had a wolf dog. So then the shelter director, had this bee in her bonnet about it, and she was determined to kill these dogs. So, actually it turns out the second one, which I was involved with, the second one was, I was involved in generating the, sorry, that's good, okay, thanks, the petition, and this one generated far fewer signatures, but it was still very effective. Both animals ended up going to a wolf sanctuary. But it kind of underscored the shelter director's retrogressive thinking mentality. So, things continued on. We're talking about, this is from 2015. So I started writing opinion pieces, and specifically, so my first one, and they're all in the links at the end if you're interested in looking at them. I've posted a whole bunch of links so that you can go through and see all the documentation for everything that we did. So I was writing editorials, and then I had another member of the group who was also writing a bunch of editorials about the shelter. I wrote a lot about the lawsuit, and it was very data-driven. So then, after that, they threw us a bone, so to speak, and this was after years of battling. So one of the first things that happened that was in our favor was that they decided that it was time, that 74 years, it was time to build a new shelter. So they built this brand spanking new shelter for $35 million. It does look way better. It's got large play yards. You can see, compared to the kennels that were there before, it looks a lot better. And then also simultaneously, the lawsuit started. The end of the settlement agreement period was coming up, so we had the motion to enforce. And as part of that, we got the 90 files from animals that were killed, and we found 90 animals where they were in violation of the terms of the settlement agreement. So we wrote to them, and when they wrote back to us, they basically admitted to that 41 of them, they had actually been killed mistakenly or against the terms of the settlement agreement. So they were continuing to do what they were not supposed to do. So the next good thing now we're moving in a different direction, so the tides are turning here. And the next thing that happened was that the auditor, JVR, made the recommendation for the shelter director to be removed. Now she did make a lateral move. She's still the chief vet at OCAC. I think, she is a veterinarian. It remains to be determined whether or not she's the appropriate person, but I do think that she just was not fit. She wasn't the right person to be the shelter director, which is a different job. Now, what they did after that was they put in a new interim director, and this interim director came from Community Resources, so she was a politician, and they still hadn't hired a full-time, the director that they were going to have in place, and so she was interim director for I think 6 months maybe, and she was great. She was really good, and I think it was really important to have her in there because she got to understand the inner workings of the shelter. And so that she would be able to be an effective boss for the incoming director, who would yet to be determined. Also, so just as sort of a little detour here, at the same time, what happened was I met this guy. I actually met him in 2016. This is Stephen Baldwin. He's a trainer, and he's actually somebody that a lot of people here at Austin Pets Alive know because he takes in the really, really last chance dogs. So Austin Pets Alive sends him their sanctuary dogs, and he was living in Ohio at the time. And we had my advocacy and rescue partner, who's sitting in front here, Summer Parker. She and I basically sent him 2 dogs. One of them I had for a year and a half in boarding and was taking care of her, and then the other one from Orange County. We sent him 2 dogs. And then he expressed interest in moving to Southern California. So Summer and I helped him to move out to Southern California, and the 3 of us set up our own 501c3 called Underdog Alliance. And the focus of our group is in helping with the large breed behavior dogs, the last 5%. The reason I'm going off on this detour is because he was actually instrumental in helping us with engaging the new interim director and being able to show her how important it was to have somebody running the shelter who has a very, who cares and who has an understanding about animal behavior. So at the time of when she was already in place, and as they were moving to the new shelter, what we did was, with the rescue that I had collaborating with financially, we tried to engage her by agreeing to take all the large breed behavior dogs, which was 12 of them, at the time of the move. So she didn't have to put down any dogs that were on the youth list at that time. I also simultaneously introduced her to a lot of the key players from the no-kill space. Obviously, I'd done a lot of networking over the years, so I introduced her to Jose Ocaño, among others, and Kristen Auerbach, and who were very, very instrumental in securing this. So what happened was I introduced Jose to JVR, I introduced him to Samantha, who was the interim director, and Jose was placed on the hiring committee. It's not a secret because it's on your podcast.
Yeah.
And serendipitously, miraculously, Mike Caviani comes in and is now the new director of OC Animal Care. So the importance of this is that bringing Mike in as the new director has been a complete shift. So before I was against the shelter, and now I've pivoted because obviously I have management there in place that is progressive. That's exactly what we've been asking for. So now, with him in place, oh, and sorry, just going back here, I'll also mention that Best Friends, through Jose, was very kind enough to make a huge donation to the kitten saving program at OCAC. So we had a check giving ceremony with all that. So here are the results, which are pretty impressive. I don't think this data hasn't been shared yet, but looking at the data, you can see, I can't see, but my glasses back on, sorry. But what you can see is that, so this is the new data. So here's the old data where it's 67%, right? And it is a Silomar, but I can only use a Silomar because that's all I had at the time to compare. So this just shows you the drastic shift where, okay, 2015 it was 67%, and now it's 84%. The other thing is that the owner-requested euthanasias have dropped drastically. Now, the intake has also gone down quite a bit too, so that has to be taken into consideration. But if you look down here, you can see that the number of kittens being killed has gone down significantly. And actually, I was talking to Mike last night, and he said that that December is the first time that they've gotten to no-kill, true no-kill. Like looking at these numbers, this number down here, raw data, no-kill, 90%, which is a huge achievement. And so this is the state of things now, the new way forward. There's Mike Caviani, Stefan. This person here, Tammy Osborne, was the rescue coordinator, and we had a terrible relationship with her. And now she's fully on board. She has changed drastically. So that's been a huge success. And of course, now because Mike is in place and we want Mike to be successful, we are doing everything we can. So we help him with the dogs, the large breed dogs. We take them at this time, or try to take as many as we can, so that his numbers are looking good. I mean, he doesn't, he's still doing fantastically without that, but just for that particular category of animals. So I wrote up a summary. I think we probably don't have time for me to go through it, but I just wanted to this is kind of the roadmap. You can look at it in your own time if you want to. And then just as some takeaway points in terms of like how to negotiate with people like this. The first thing I think, the most important thing, is to always maintain professionalism. And I know Ryan Clinton talks about this in his talks. You always want to dress professionally, you want to speak professionally, you don't want to use profanity. I mean, not that I don't use profanity outside of this, but when you're talking to people in this sphere, you do not want to use profanity. As I saw, I'm wrapping it up right now. I think accuracy with data is absolutely crucial. That is the most important thing. I think finding the person within the political hierarchy with access and power, like I did with Paul Walters, was really very important, extremely important. I think making sure that your targeting is on point and has legal meaning. Because I'm seeing a lot of groups right now who are trying to do this elsewhere, and they're focusing on things like medical animals, where I think that legally that's not going to work. Like if you're going to go up against the vet,
that you're not going to get where you want to get to. So you have to find something that resonates, but also has legal meaning, if that's what you're going for, if you're talking about going for a lawsuit. And then I think try to get a seat. When you're talking about pivoting, which is my last point, I think that you want to try and get a seat at the table to be making the decision about who comes in next. I mean, I certainly was not sitting at the table, but there was a lot of behind-the-scenes maneuvering that I think was very important. So these are the links. There's links, so if you click on them and are interested, this has all the documentation of letters that I've written, editorials, the lawsuit. So it's just basically a framework for anybody who's trying to, who's back where I was in 2015 and wants to do something similar where they are. That's it. Any questions?
Were there any pitfall ordinances when you started?
No, there were not. Not in Orange County, I don't think so. Long Beach has a mandatory spay neuter, but we're not Long Beach, so no, they didn't have that.
Or adopting out, restricting adoption?
No breed-specific legislation, nothing like that, no. All right. Like I said, anybody's interested, they can just go and look at